Oh, hi there, folks. You are back again on the Virtually Agile podcast with Chris Stone, the continuous improvement coach. Today, I'm joined by the founder of Everyday Agile, a no-nonsense ex-armed forces individual. How are you today, Jack?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thank you for having me on. Much appreciated.
Absolute pleasure. So you will do a far better introduction than I, Jack. Why don't you tell us a little about you and what you're about?
Yeah, so obviously my name's Jack. Mum and Dad thought they were cool, so it's just JAC. There's no K on the end of it. It's the Welsh way of spelling it. Yeah, the ex-forces thing's interesting because I don't tend to talk about that anymore for no particular reason. I just think there's far better people out there doing better things and saying more relevant things than I could now. But I think it's definitely given me a foot in the door over the years. I don't think there's any denying that. Yeah, I run, direct a business called Everyday Agile, which is a challenger consultancy based in the northwest of England. You know, I'm sure we'll get on to talking about brand and things potentially, but we know who we are. We know who we're up against. It's not for everyone, but it was never built for everyone. It was a bit of a happy accident in the way that it's scaled over the last, especially 2 years. Just trying to do things a bit differently, really, or maybe not differently, but trying to communicate in a way that people, potential clients, can digest. So it's been a bit of a learning journey over the past few years. But I do want to say, I think you're someone who, like, fair play to the way you step out of, well, I don't know if it's stepping out of your comfort zone, but the way you conduct yourself online, I think, I tip my hat. You definitely do stuff that I wouldn't do, just because I just wouldn't do it. I'm trying to give you a compliment, but it's not coming out very well. The way that the amount of free
Okay,
stuff you
let me
give
start with
away.
saying thank you for the compliment.
Yeah, the amount of free stuff you give away, how open and vulnerable you are on LinkedIn, because that's the only place I really see you, I think is commendable. So, well done, I suppose.
I appreciate that. You mentioned there, and I guess I'm really keen to understand, what is it that I'm doing that you feel isn't something that you would do yourself, and why is that?
I treat LinkedIn as a game, I suppose. And when I think of it as a pie chart, you only see that much of it in terms of the rest of my life. And I'm happy with exposing certain things behind the curtain from time to time. But I'm comfortable with what I share, and even more comfortable with what I don't. So I think, but I think what you do is, they need people like you to be a voice for others, and to be honest about whatever path they're on and whatever their experience.
So it's a very good answer. I think it's always to each their own situation with these things. And I like the way you said you're comfortable with what you share, but also more comfortable with what you don't. I think it's quite a powerful statement there. You've also touched upon a point which I think is worth reflecting on further, and that's one of the reasons I am so open is because I believe there are people out there who don't quite have either the same confidence as yet or the position to enable themselves to be as open. So it's easier for me to go out there and say, hey, I struggle with ADHD or I've got depression, because if that has any repercussions on me, I'm comfortable with my ability to find another opportunity. Whereas there may be people out there who have less confidence in that. They may be in less of a position of privilege, and therefore they can't do those things as openly. And if they don't see people like me willing to do that, then we're going to continue to struggle with some of the things that we struggle with in silence.
What's the cost to you for that, though, out of interest?
I don't consciously see a cost. No one's flagged to me, hey, I've not wanted to hire you because you've been so honest.
No, I mean,
More often than not, I get...
Sorry, there's a bit of a lie. I mean, in terms of you, as physically, emotionally, mentally, is there a cost there? Like, is it tiring?
I don't find it tiring because I don't necessarily feel emotions as strongly as others, and therefore it doesn't feel like it's something that drains my energy to do this. What I actually find, it's interesting, when I find more difficult is when someone asks me a question about how I feel about something. Let's say I'm in a coaching session and someone says, "Oh, how do you think that went?" My mind kind of goes blank because I'm not very good at describing emotions. Like for me, like a very default state is, yeah, it was okay. Because I don't feel the strong positive or the strong negative. And then when someone continuously asks you that question, like, how did it go for you? What did you like about that? I'm like, well, that was kind of okay. And so I find that side of things, I guess, more difficult. But I don't find it something a struggle when I'm doing that and sharing on LinkedIn because it's not quite the same. It's more of I'm putting that on myself to answer those questions or share that when it's different when someone kind of drops that on me in the moment or does it in some sort of therapy session or in a coaching session or otherwise. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that side of things. I'm really keen to talk about you about the power of brands and brand in the product world. And I've got, I guess, a starting question. Is it good or is it better to be good at what you do, or is it better to be known out there?
Good question. I think you have to have a mixture of both. I think I can only talk about me as an example. Well, I can talk about others as an example, but to answer the question properly, I think there are many people who are above me in terms of agile practitioners, much more, much more experience, much more articulate in the way they describes things, much more empathetic, much more skillful, but no one knows who they are. And I think it needs to go hand in hand, especially in the market as it is today. Now, but from a product point of view, I think it's still a mixture, but 90% of people, I can put the links to these studies and I can send them on to you and you can put them in the notes if you want. But, 90% of people consider just two brands when purchasing. And I was thinking about this conversation before. If I ask you to think of the top two online collaborative tools, which two spring to mind?
Mural, if I'm thinking virtual whiteboards, if I'm
Yeah,
thinking communications, then I'm going to go down the routes of Slack and I hate to say Teams, but just because it's so prevalent and everyone can access it, Teams.
yeah. So the first one was the answer. Online collaborative tools in terms of whiteboarding. You think of Mural and Miro, but how many others are there? It's just that those two have got such a strong brand, and that's not just from the product. That's for how they market themselves, the community feel, the swag that they send out to people. When they invite people into the building. If you're outside of those two, you're an underdog. Like that is the reality, and especially when again can link there. Studies show that 60% of customers who feel a high brand sort of connection are more likely to buy, even if the cost is higher. So, Gymshark, for example, are their clothes, are their products any better than the bargain bucket of Sports Direct? Maybe, but running tights are running tight. It's just Gymshark, for example, have got such a strong brand and such a strong community. The brand sometimes outweighs the product, and I think some organizations may have the best product out there, but if they've got a weak brand or if no one knows who they are, it can be difficult. And I don't think many people in product managers, product owners, product gurus, whatever self-title is out there. I don't think brand is spoken about that much. It's all about the tech and the problems it solves, which is all great. But if no one knows who you are, you're a scarecrow in a field that no one's walking in, potentially.
It's often when it comes to the public speaking side of things, right? You could have the best ideas in the world. If you aren't able to share those ideas in a way that people remember or maintain focus on you, and you're in that session distracted on your phone, then the great message you have, will fall on deaf ears and won't be remembered outside of that auditorium or location. And the same is true if you've got the best concepts in the world, the best ideas in the world, but you can't deliver them in a way that people know you exist, then those ideas won't be used, or people won't benefit from them.
So I suppose back to the original question: is it important to be good? Is it important to be good, or do people need to know who you are?
Is it better to be good or to be known?
Today, I'll say it's better to be known for the
I
for the
lean that
right
direction as well.
yeah, known
There
for
are
the
people,
right thing. That's should add.
yeah, there are people who have become infamous for not something you would sit there and go, "Wow, they've done this great, amazing thing." They've just become viral for something we might consider less powerful, less exciting, less of a contribution to the world, but they are more known and therefore they're able to sell products as a consequence. I'm not going to name certain celebrities who have achieved that status, but it happens.
I will.
And yeah, you see those people. You can say, go for it. Which names are you going to share?
But what has Simon Sinek actually done? I think start with why is the most overrated thing out
What
there.
has he done?
Personally, like he's great and he's obviously a very good marketeer. But what, like, you dig a bit, like, what is he? What was his background? What has he actually done? Before that video, and I'm sure, yeah, like I said, I'm sure he's a great consultant, definitely a great marketer. I think, like a lot of, like many people, who's just at the right place at the right time. I don't get it. I've never understood the hype, but that's just me.
If there's enough demand for something and people like it, they'll buy it, right?
Yeah, if you can convince enough people to buy it, we'll buy into it. But that's a powerful brand, isn't it? He is a brand. He is a powerful brand.
Mm-hmm.
He is.
He is a brand. He is what they're calling the solopreneur these days. So I had aspirations at one point of becoming an entrepreneur, running a consultancy like you do, running Everyday Agile. And then I got to the point where I was like, all I'm doing here is making harder work for myself on the things that I don't enjoy doing, because there is inevitably a huge degree of pressure and administrative stuff that comes with that. You've got to do the hiring, the firing, all the stuff that comes with running a company. And I learned actually what I'm better at is the stuff that I enjoy creating and enjoy doing, that am able to motivate myself to do consistently. So I switched my thinking towards the solopreneur mindset, where you yourself are the brand. And that's an example of what Simon Sinek does. He's the brand. Obviously, he's got a company that sits beneath that is where the money channels through. But he himself is the brand. You say Simon Sinek, a lot of people know who you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that's really self-aware of you. I think I've taken the opposite approach. I think if someone came with a certain amount of money tomorrow and bought the business, I would probably, I'd probably start something else, but I'd be quite happy to not be there, to be front and center. I actually think, and again, it's interesting, isn't it? That's why it's good to have conversations like this. I think there's more pressure on being, the solo, but because it has to be, one. I'm not going to say you. One has to be then the product and the front and center. So I don't think either approach is, it's horses for courses, isn't it? But I would find it more difficult in your position, I think, personally.
Again, horses for courses, different preferences. I think for me, it's because where I'm solopreneuring, I don't have as much responsibility for other people's stuff. I can just do my own thing, and I can do that very well. I don't mind being the center of attention in that respect. And I can leverage the thing I'm great at, which is creating cool ways of doing things and in an entertaining way. Then it just works for me and my brand of ADHD. So it's just a discovery, and I think it does take that self-awareness. Now, I think the reason for the initial belief that I should create a consultancy was just because I that was the paradigm that I knew. You know, if you were an employee and you wanted to become a self-employed, you would either be a limited contractor and just contract to one company at a time, or
Mm,
you try and run a consultancy. And it was just a lack of awareness as to what the other options out there that drove me down that direction more than anything.
I like it. I think it's obviously working.
I'll keep doing what works for me. We talked about some of these big brands then. So Gymshark, you highlighted, are they necessarily better quality than, you know, an alternative? And if you think about some of the other big brands out there, right? Uber, one of the biggest companies in the world, or the biggest brands in the world, you could say. If you go to a country, sorry, and you're trying to get a taxi, you can probably use the app and find an Uber service nearby. Famously, they've, I think, only just become profitable 14 years after being launched. And yet one of the biggest brands in the world that changed the way the taxi or the transport industry worked, arguably for the better. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, depend. If I was a taxi driver, I probably wouldn't think. So it depends on who you speak to. But again, if I anchor myself back to that 90% of people only choose two brands when purchasing, you know, if you're if you're stranded somewhere. So it happened to me the other week or the week before Christmas, the train broke down. I had to get home. I'm in a lucky position where I could afford to get a taxi home from quite a far distance. Who do you think of? Well, it's Uber, or you're trying to ring around a local taxi company. Uber is always going to win in that scenario because it was easier for me. I could track where the car was. And if that one didn't turn up for any reason, I could get another one pretty quickly. So in that case, if you're thinking about a taxi at the moment, I don't, yeah, the two brands I suppose would be Uber. I'm sure there's another. I can't remember the name of it. I'm sure there's another one out there. But I suppose what I'm
There's a
saying
Bolt's quite a big one.
is that I know in the Middle East it's Uber or Careem, for
Yeah.
example. So what I'm saying is that the Uber brand is going to suck people in, and it's just really good that it's convenient. The customer doesn't care whether they're profitable or
I
not.
think you touched upon, yeah. Right. So if I'm a customer and my options are, right, I'm going to get in this taxi outside a train station with a complete stranger that I don't know who they are. And yeah, it might look like a taxi, but I'm not 100% certain. And or I've got to call up a taxi company. And my experience of taxi companies in the past, I'm not sure if this resonates with anyone, is you call them up, maybe you don't get through, then you say, oh, I need a taxi, and like when and where and what and why, and it takes, oh, it'll be there in 20 minutes, and then you're kind of waiting around, you don't know when they're going to come, and then there's a lot of unknowns there. You then add in Uber, which made it really super simple. You load up an app on your phone, you see exactly when it's arriving because it's all data tracked. You know who's going to pick you up, what reviews they've got. You've got a level of safety there as well because you know that it's all being tracked somewhere. And if there was, God forbid, any accidents, then there is an audit trail saying who picked you up and where. There's a huge way that Uber changed the game from a perspective of just getting about in a safer way that's less friction for the customer.
Yeah. I mean, the downside is my dad was a taxi driver in a small seaside town where I'm from. There's just supply outweighs the demand, also, especially when there's lots of taxis, traditional taxis, on top of, and then you pile on, the drivers or on top of that. It's easy for us to talk about the theory behind it, but the negative is, it's ultimately impacting someone's livelihood. God, that went dark.
So shall we? We got a nice segue here. So we've got the concept of taxi drivers having the paradigm shift for them and the impact there. They either had to develop new skills or maybe they pivoted to working for Uber. We've got a lot of people in the agile world out there right now in scrum masters and coaching roles that are struggling to find work.
Mhm.
There is currently more supply of those roles than there is demand for them, evidenced by a lot of people being out of work. What's the response for those people? What do you think they should be doing?
I think they've got to show people what's on the menu, but it's nothing new to what I've been saying for not years and years. 'Cause I haven't been around years and years, but especially for the last 2, 3. I think in a world where supply outweighs demand, the mission, if you like, is to become at the forefront of someone's mind, and that comes back to reputation, brand, whatever you want to call it, personal brand. If people don't know what you're about, or if you're piling in onto threads that the end client is going to look like and go, probably going to avoid that person because you're trying to live up to someone else's expectation of what you should be like online. And it's not going to do you any favors. I think talking in language clients or customers understand is really powerful. Just trying to set yourself apart, really, in a world that is, I keep saying that the supply outweighs the demand. Like this whole argument about remote work and things like that. I get it. I understand it. People should have the opportunity to work from where they want, but I don't understand. Yeah, people have still got mortgages to pay, and these companies have every right to sort of say, this is the expectation. Yes, we've got it wrong. Yes, we did say you could all work from home initially. We've learned our lessons. This is our expectation based on the culture we want to build. You can either accept that or not. I don't know. I don't personally see it as that hard. In saying that, I am what you would describe as a dunk, which is dual income, no kids. So that's very easy for me to say.
Yeah, there are always circumstances which make a decision easier or more complex for you. If you have a mortgage and you don't have another source of income, then you may be more needing to accept harder rules, like you have to be in office X number of days a week. I'm with you in that I believe it's every company's prerogative to set how they feel they should work and the conditions in which they work. I do feel the companies that have those hard and fast, everyone in the office X number of days a week without any kind of blurred lines or without any appreciation of the nuance, they are the ones that are perhaps being a little myopic and may cost themselves. I mean, it's a bit of loss aversion, right? There's a bias around loss aversion. If you win £100, $100, €100, that doesn't feel as powerful as losing £100. And I think it's the same when it comes to the remote work side of things. Everyone experienced it for years. They were then told, oh yeah, this is going great. You're doing such a good job. We love you. Thank you for all your hard work. Oh, and the data's telling you you're just as productive, if not better than before. And we're continuing this way permanently now. And then, oh no, we're going to take that away now. We're going back on what we've said. And we haven't shown the data saying you have to be back because we're actually worse off. So it can feel like a much stronger, more powerful emotion from a loss perspective.
I also think sometimes, and I hear what you're saying. I just think that sometimes that in the world of work, again, going back to my theoretical pie chart, in the world of work, there's only a small amount of people who post about this stuff on LinkedIn in the whole world. And then I often sit there and think, well, okay, someone's posted that X company said they're mandated to be in 2 times a week, Tuesday and Thursday. I'll pluck that out there. It's not a real example. On paper, you can disagree with, or one could disagree with that. You could debate it. But then I think, well, is that really the case? If I went into that company as a permanent member of, a permanent employee and said, well, this is my situation. Could I maybe change it? I don't know if these things are as hard and fast as people describe on LinkedIn sometimes, and I could be wrong. But when we never know, unless we're there, unless we're in the actual room, we don't really know what's going on. And it's only a very small percentage of people who are commenting on it. So I do always, because every permanent place I've worked in, they've been very understanding. They've been very empathetic. They've tried to accommodate people.
What's fascinating, I've seen these scenarios play out when I was last at a permanent company. I won't say the names. There was a very serious CEO of a certain demographic who strongly believed everyone had to be in the office for us to be successful. And post pandemic, he's like, you will either come into the office or you can find a new job. Now, that was the messaging. But then you go a level below that to the other members of the C-suite who I was working with, and they had a less hard and fast rule. They were trying to be flexible. They were trying to help people be in a location that works for them. So it's not necessarily what you see isn't always the reality. It's an interesting one. And
I
again,
think
I think this is going to be one of those things that there's not a defined answer for. We're still learning this over
no.
the years because we've not reached this level of hybrid working ever. This is a new experience for the world. We've never had this many people working in distributed locations across the world on various different models, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 1 day, and we're learning. It's all new.
Yeah, so. So 2 points, I suppose. It depends on the industry. I think, like you just alluded to, like if you're working in the defense sector, you can't be surprised that they want you in to talk about secret stuff. Like you got to go in with your eyes wide open with that, because you can't do it or not at the moment. That just can't happen at home for the right reasons. So there's always going to be an expectation depending on the industry. The only thing I would say is back to what people should be doing is, if you're on LinkedIn looking for your next gig and you're just publicly slating job adverts for not being the perfect agile job, like, come on, who do you think that's not making you look good? Is the one thing I always, that may be a bit of feedback you want to give in the interview, or it may be an opportunity if you were to apply for it to be successful. And we talk about empathy and safety and blah, blah, blah. Think about the person who's written that job advert that you don't think's perfect. They may just be some week one recruiter who has been given this to post on LinkedIn. And if every agile job spec was perfect, what's the point? We wouldn't, we've sort of completed it at that point, haven't we? So just be careful, I think, because that's the first place I go when looking for someone, is on LinkedIn to see if they're being a dick or not. And if they have, I'm probably not going to go and ask them to come and work with us.
I think it's interesting when someone starts being active on any sort of social platform. Often their default is, I have to say the controversial things. I have to say something that will capture people's attention. And it's backed by, annoyingly, the algorithm itself. The algorithm is designed to show you stuff that people have argued and commented on. It's driven by the clickbaity psychology that catches us. We want to read the thing that disagrees with what we think. So it's annoying that kind of psychology backs it. It often, to me, is a starting point for many people that are new when they're creating content or being active. I don't think they need to start there. I would personally see more value in someone sharing a genuine opinion that appreciates both sides of the argument. And I don't mean just be an it depends person and just sit on the fence continuously. You can appreciate the different perspectives without lambasting someone, breaking someone else down to build up your own argument or viewpoint.
No. I mean, I don't think I've ever crossed the line. I think I can back up 99% of the things I've ever put out there. But I've always gone after concepts and ideals, never people. Because I think that is crossing. I think if I'm subtly or unsubtly prodding fun at one of the big four, they're not worried about me. So I think they're fair game and they can take it. If I'm after Jeff, the IT consultant, naming that person individually, I think that's a bit different. So I think you've got to choose your target wisely. I think you've got to be able to back up what you're writing. and stand behind it. But yeah, and never go after. I think there's been a bit of that over the past week. I don't get involved. Just let them all fight. Eat themselves alive. It's good for business.
And just read popcorn and just read, right?
Yeah. Not. Yeah. I don't know what the answer is. I can understand why people are turned off by Agile if they look at some of the threads and some of the comments. But from a business point of view, there's a nice little alternative over here who just wants to help you out. That's the way I see it. Carry on, folks. Keep eating each other alive.
You'll be at the slide then. Okay, so I mean, you mentioned there you've not been afraid in the past to kind of shy away from maybe the risque, the controversial, the unpopular opinions. What do you think is your most unpopular opinion that you like to share?
Yeah, I have made some. I've made a few mistakes. I don't think I say anything. Well, I mean, what do you think? What? I don't think I've said anything. I think I've really. Yeah, I'd love to get some of your thoughts. I think I know one that you might have an opinion on.
I've loved seeing some of the marketing materials you put out there, kind of hinting at the innuendo. I remember the one, it was like getting into bed with a big consultancy and being left disappointed, and you kind of had the advert of the couple together, and I thought, love that. Yeah, that's my sense of humor. I can appreciate others might take that differently and not be receptive.
Yeah, they did.
There are very different viewpoints. Like, I've had people tell me off saying the Tinder retrospective I created is unprofessional, doesn't belong in the workplace, and dehumanizes people or infantilizes things. I was like, well, it's backed by science. We naturally read left to right. It's such a widely popular mechanism now that modern UX builds kind of the swiping mechanism into it. It was never intended for that. Can't believe that.
Yeah. I think what it is, I thought this might come up. I'm trying to be more thoughtful as I get older. And people can take this how they want, I suppose. But I think what I've worked out is the reason why I may go to places where other people may not is because I'm pretty comfortable with my circle. I've got friends. I'm not really on LinkedIn to make friends. If that's an outcome, then great. So if someone from the Agile community doesn't like it, that's okay, because they're not the target. They're never going to buy from me anyway. And the analogy I've sort of been thinking about lately is if you think of a football stadium and you think of the away end, which is very smaller than the rest. Like, I'm after the away end. Like, there's no point me having a network full of home fans, if that makes sense, because they're not going to buy from the business anyway. I think I have made some mistakes in terms of some of the marketing, but in terms of posts, I think the biggest one where we may have different thoughts is the whole training thing and long-term training and stuff like that. But again, I wasn't going after a person, I was going after a concept, not necessarily people who are doing it, because I know some of the people who are doing it and they're great people. And just because I don't, whatever, doesn't mean it's not. I'm just the bloke with the keyboard.
So let's talk about that then. What was it about the longer term training that you there?
I just think call it what it is. Call it a journey. Call it I've got no experience of it, so what can I only know secondhand information. It's a community of practice that you're paid to be at. And someone very high up in the industry has put their name on it and has stepped away from the certified training. It's probably paid his mortgage. I reckon he's doing all right off the back of it. So it's just call it it's just training. It's a community of practice where you share ideas. But it's still training in my eyes. And I'm happy to be proven wrong or correct.
Okay, I've never thought of it as a community practice. There is definitely a community element to it in that you do continuously learn with one another. At least the learning pathways that I do. Can't speak to all of
Yeah, of
it.
course.
It is still training because the way that the Scrum Mastery pathway that Jeff Watts has created is delivered is that it's 2 days of training. Yeah, you've got a clear structure for that. Then you meet monthly, and what I like about this part is that whilst you're bringing the same group of people together, they democratically choose the topics they most want to learn about next. And then the guide, i.e. myself, would then prepare materials to teach about that. And then, yeah, that changes every month. So it's learning in someone's context. As an example, right? We've done our first beginning of our training, and that's the standard kind of 2 days style at the beginning. Beyond that, a month later, you've got a team or a group of people that might have had some issues with resolving conflict, and they say, oh, we'd love to learn more about that. I will then share with them techniques about that, get them to practice it, and they get to go away and try that, put it into practice, come back the next month. This is what we tried, this is what we learned, this is what worked, this is what didn't work. So I think it goes beyond a community of practice because you're not just leveraging the learning from that community, you're also still teaching over a period of time. For me, I think the strongest impact this has is the fact that it builds in the feedback loops to reinforce learning, rather than it being a standardized syllabus where you might learn a lot of things at the beginning. You're expected to retain all of that information, which is not always the case. You then get a shiny certificate which says, I'm a certified Scrum Master or otherwise. And then you're expected to be competent and perform in that role, whether or not you've understood it correctly, interpreted it correctly, or able to demonstrate that you can do. For me, the longer term learning pathways are about that learning, but also seeing someone is able to do what they've learned. And for me, it makes it for me, and from what I've seen with the learners I've worked with, it makes it a stronger practice than some of the alternatives. Not that those don't have value. They fit in certain companies and individuals' needs from a learning perspective. Not everyone wants to commit to a separate journey. Not everyone has the budget for that, the time for that, the capacity for that, the energy for that. But if we're talking about trying to demonstrate something being closer to mastery and supporting someone over time as opposed to a one-off session, that's where the value comes.
Oh, like I said, you may have, maybe, I'm open to being wrong. The way you've articulated it, it's hard to disagree with. Maybe it's just not my bag. And maybe that's it. I wouldn't want anyone to start. And what I have seen, not from you, it's like say, oh, well, 2-day courses are bad. Well, some people just want that. That's what some people want. And some people want the longer journey. And like I said, I'm just someone with an opinion. Doesn't mean it's the right one. And I've never done it, so can't really speak too much about it. I just think it's, I don't know. It is what it is. It's still training. Call it a learning pathway. Call it a journey. Call it a guide. It's still training. I suppose that was my biggest
learning and development, right? It's learning and development, which is part of some people's development plans. And for others as well, I just wanted to learn a new technique. So I might just want to do a Scrum at Scale course and learn about scaling. That might be all that. I don't necessarily say it's the only option. I've never professed it's necessarily a better option for everyone. It's definitely certain people's progression. I believe it is more demonstrative of the capability that often clients are looking for, because I've been at the receiving end where clients have had a bunch of grads who have just done the 2-day CSM or equivalent and been sold to as a competent Scrum Master, and that's not the case. We've also had a lot of clients that are looking to build capability, and this is where one of those training options are there. What they're there for. I'm not trying to convince you
absolutely
better or worse. And what I love about what you've said, by the way, is that you are willing to be proven wrong. So you don't have a set stance and just saying that's it forever. Like, we're human. We learn new things, the scientific approaches, we get information, and we take it on board.
And we've all got a week.
Right, so I want to slowly wrap things up again. There was one final thing I wanted to touch upon you with. That was, you don't practice as an agile coach or scrum master anymore, and you mentioned that a few times recently. You also then don't write about it. Love to hear more about why is it you don't write about it anymore?
So I'm not doing it at the moment. I'm under no illusion that one day it all might collapse. Will be just me again. I will happily. I mean, I'd deliver pizzas if I had to. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you know what I mean. It's just an example. I'm under no illusion that it may just be me going from contract to contract again one day. I'm probably going to contradict myself. Oh, am I? I don't really like to write things about things that I'm not doing. So for me to start talking about the daily scrum or 5 tips to increase your backlog refinement, I think that would be a bit disingenuous at the moment because I'm not doing it. And I think that's where the talking a bit more about brand trying to put a spotlight over what the great work that people are doing who are representing the business. I think that's my job at the moment. I can't pluck stories out of the air. All the stories that I've tried to tell in the past, they've been because they've either happened or are happening. At the moment, I am not in the weeds from that point of view. I'm in the weeds elsewhere, don't get me wrong, but from that Scrum Mastery, Agile coachy point of view, I can't talk about something I'm not.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, honestly. Like you, I believe that if you are portraying yourself as an expert in something, and perhaps trying to sell something of consequence, then you should ideally be practicing or relevant, ideally recent experience, and something that was decades old. Think about how fast the world moves. If I was to go back a few years ago, maybe several years ago, most companies mostly only do Scrum. Whereas now there's like all sorts of hybrids here, there, and everywhere. So the pace of change in terms of what people are doing and what they're using these days, and therefore the stories you have, they become less and less relevant. And I think for me, the challenge I see sometimes, you see people who are going out there telling these stories that are decades old, or even training people in a role that they've not performed in the modern era, and therefore that can feel disingenuous.
Okay. I would say some of the people who are selling either CSMs or learning pathways are in position.
Essentially so. The learning pathways, again, I'm not trying to be specific, but one of the entry requirements for the guide process for the Scrum Mastery pathway that I'm part of is that you have to be practicing. Like you're a guide more than you are a trainer. Yeah, not all do the same approach when they're doing other longer term durations. And again, I'm not trying to sit here and call out names or say individuals. This is more personal opinion. I believe if you are representing yourself as an expert, if you're training the next generation of people performing in a role, ideally you should be doing so from a position of I've experienced this, but not 20 years ago. I've experienced this in a time where we were using these approaches, these tools, this different hybrid working situations and otherwise. You've got someone who's teaching someone about how to be a Scrum Master. They've only ever worked in a physical face-to-face location in a banking industry. The only stories they've got are related to that. That, to me, would question the richness of that experience, perhaps.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're on the same page there. I suppose I'm just coming at it from my job is to chief first officer. I think I'll refer to it as for Everyday Agile at the moment. My job is to get the right sort of attention on the business and even more so on the people who are representing it because they're up to some absolutely fantastic things that are probably beyond my skill set. That's where the focus is. And that may change, don't get me wrong. If it all crumbles and goes to pot, I'm sure you'll see me giving daily Scrum tips at some point. But for now, I would be, that's not the role I'm in.
All right, amazing. Well, it's time to wrap things up. It's a pleasure to have you today on the show, Jack, the Chief First Officer of
Thank you.
Everyday Agile. That's a great title, by the way.
Yeah.
Where can our
Cheers,
listeners
Chris.
learn more
Appreciate it.
about
And
you and your work?
keep it up. Yeah. LinkedIn, Jack Hughes, or type in Everyday Agile, type in Everyday Agile into YouTube and it's on there. And I use LinkedIn. Nowhere else, really. I'm not that hard to find. I'm 6 foot, lanky and ginger. So come and say hello. But feel free to question anything that I've said.
Let's do it. This is something I'm a huge advocate for. You can question, you can disagree with someone and their opinions. Just do so respectfully. Appreciate their other stances that you might be looking at it from. And you don't have to attack someone else to bring your own ideas or concepts. Now, folks, if you liked the episode, time for a shameless plug. Do that thing, subscribe, follow, all that jazz to get each episode as it lands when they hit the shelf. If you're thinking of being on a podcast yourself, slide into my DMs. I am also just as thirsty as Jack when it comes to getting people on the show. I wanted to clarify that before I went down a really dark path there. And we always welcome new voices. Until next time, don't stop believing. Thanks again, Jack.